Hello, good morning, and welcome to Words That Matter, a modern day book club. I'm Lee Smith, and we have a terrific show for you this morning. Our guest is someone fascinating. I've been following him on Twitter for a little while now, and just his insights, his knowledge about what's happening with our economy right now. Just the way he puts it, it's very clear, very detailed for people like me and maybe like you too. Maybe you understand what's happening very well, but I certainly don't. But our guest today, he understands perfectly what's happening, and the way he's laid it out is really interesting. And he'll be doing some of that today. But the other thing that we're going to be talking about is, as a modern day book club, we're going to be talking about a book that our guest thinks really helps illuminate this particular moment. So without further delay, welcome, Peter St Onge. Thank you so much for being with us here on Words That Matter.
Thank you for having me on, Lee. I really appreciate it.
I told you when we spoke a little bit before that I've been following your Twitter X feed for a little while now, and it's just fantastic the way that you explain things that are going on. So if you can just explain a little bit of background, your background, and then also why you decided to start doing your great show.
Yeah, so I studied economics in college and then I went off and worked in corporate marketing. So my mom was very disappointed. She said, "You have this nice degree. What are you doing marketing?" And what struck me is that in the field of marketing, you've got models of human behavior that they're not very rigorous, right? Like they're very seat of the pants. Okay. Like if you show somebody a message 7 times, they'll buy. Okay.
Yeah.
This is not complicated stuff, but
Oh.
it's accurate. Okay. Because if it's not, BS walks in marketing. Okay. If it doesn't work, people discard it and they try something else. And then you contrast that with what I'd studied in economics, where you've got these gorgeous models. I mean, that just the calculus alone would knock your socks off, and none of them are real, right? It's all fake. Okay. So, we've got the 2008 crisis. You had all these PhDs who predicted with the big equations and the big heads, and it was all completely fake. And so for me, I found that fascinating. On the one hand, you've got the practitioners who are just working with real simple rules of thumb, which is accurate. And so, I kind of went out looking for what the heck is wrong with economics. And that's when I stumbled on Austrian economics, which I'd never learned about in school. I went to a prestigious school, which means that they hide all the good stuff from you. And so I found Murray Rothbard and Ludwig von Mises. And that, for me, just opened my eyes. It was like, finally, here is a model of economics. Economics being the study of human behavior, fundamentally, really, it's kind of applied psychology. So a model of economics that is actually accurate. And that, for me, was just an eye-opener. So I went back for the PhD in economics, and then I taught in Taiwan for about 5 years, partly because I didn't want to enter you kind of have to believe in a certain ideology if you want to work in an American university. So that was out for me. I just didn't feel like I could
Wait,
fake that my whole
what's
life.
the ideology? What's the
And there was,
you have to believe in?
it's definitely progressive. The idea that the people are rabid animals, and they need the wise hand of government to control them. I think the worldview is basically a classroom where you've got a bunch of unruly, sort of psychopathic children who are just trying to murder each other, and you've got this teacher who is, sort of the kind overlord imposing order on it all. And I think that's sort of the progressive worldview. The people are just these horrific psychopaths. That's why they hate the Second Amendment, for example. They just imagine that the people are awful. And I mean, it's quite funny because our political system is based on the concept that the people are sovereign and that the government is serving them. So, something doesn't match here. But at any rate, so, I didn't really buy into that. I've always been on the side of the people. I think humans are just the most gorgeous thing on earth. I think government taints them. So anyway, there was a university over in Taiwan that was sort of pro-Austrian. It was kind of the home of Austrian economics in the Chinese-speaking world, because you can't really speak freely in China, so they do that in Taiwan. So I went over there, joined the faculty, taught economics and business for about 5 years. That brought me up until right before the pandemic, and we were seeing a lot of censorship, a lot of sort of government abuses here in the U.S., and so I kind of felt like I was not doing my part, not standing on the wall over goofing around in Taiwan, and so came back. Ultimately, joined
Huh.
Heritage
Peter,
Foundation.
that's a
Went to
fantastic story. It's very moving. And the way you tell your story, your sense of humor, it definitely comes through. It definitely comes through in your shows. So what is important for you to explain to people? What's the? I mean, you cover a whole bunch of different topics, and people can learn an extraordinary amount from watching you. But what do you think is the most important thing? Let's start with the general, and then move to the move to the more specific.
Yeah, I think the most
Hmm.
important is that liberty works. Liberty creates prosperity, it creates justice, it allows people to fulfill their dreams. Liberty is really the most, it's the crowning achievement of humanity. And, my area of expertise is economics, and liberty absolutely works in economics. Anytime you interfere with people, anytime you get in their way, you are impoverishing them. Unfortunately, we have a $1 trillion
Hmm.
industry government which is dedicated to doing just that, because it's venal and it's corrupt. It's
Hmm.
self-serving. It's serving its donors and its lobbyists and so on. And so a lot of what I try to do with the videos is to sort of explain to people exactly what
Huh.
the bastards are trying to do to you. And they are absolutely, they're trying to fleece the livestock. They're trying to steal your life's work and distribute it to their cronies. I actually had done these kind of videos when I was teaching. I was the only foreigner, and so they would give me all of the 9 a.m. classes because none of the Taiwanese professors wanted them, and I didn't have the seniority. So they would give me 9 a.m. classes, which is very dangerous in an MBA program because everybody drinks a lot, right? So nobody shows up. So I used to do these little shticks in the beginning of class for 3, 4 minutes, and I would try to put stuff in there that the kids would, regret missing. So, I try to pull a joke or some little statistic or something. But I did that for 5 years, and that was my favorite part of the class. Sometimes they'd run on for like 20 minutes because I didn't want to get to the textbook. And so I just mentioned to my wife I enjoy that, and she was like, "Well, go ahead and do it. You've got the internet, so
Very good
put
advice.
it up on Twitter or
Congratulations
YouTube,
to her.
whatever."
Great advice.
Yeah, she I joke everything good about the channel is all her. The backdrop. If it were me, I'd be shooting in
Well,
like a garage.
congratulations
It
to
would all be
her, and
horrific.
on the success of
Yeah,
your show. Look, is that inevitable? What you were talking about, is that something that is inevitable in a democracy, and even in a constitutional
yeah,
republic, that at a certain point the powerful will use the public's money to pay off their clients, and that's part of the power relationship.
yeah.
Is that something that's inevitable? Hmm.
I think it is. I think it's Jefferson's phrase. What is it?
Hmm.
Eternal vigilance. I think it's absolutely inevitable. We have to fight it constantly. Sometimes it's frustrating, especially we're so
Yeah.
outnumbered by the other side. The forces of socialism, the forces of big government, they outman us 10 to 1. They outspend us 100 to 1. It can get discouraging, but then I think you also want to put it in perspective that this is the challenge throughout
Right.
all of human history. We have it so
Hmm.
much better today than previous generations. The fact that we can use the internet to get our message out. Murray Rothbard talked about the 1960s. You could get the entire libertarian movement into a single living room in New York. Okay. And if you wanted to get your message out, you had to stick like a mimeographed newsletter in some anarchist bookstore and hope that they didn't notice that it was pro freedom. I mean, it was like if you consider
No,
what they were up
I
against,
right.
and back then in the
No, I totally
60s,
agree. I think
yeah,
you're absolutely right. I think you're not just seeing it
yeah,
through rose-colored lenses here. You're absolutely right, and I think that people a lot of the times, the people that you and I are speaking to, the people we call friends and colleagues, they get a little down. I'm like, we're actually in a fantastic position, and we should appreciate where we are.
We are. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
the fight
Never
is
before
lasting.
have the
Yeah.
outsiders. Right.
Um.
You're absolutely right. The fight is
Yeah.
permanent, and never before have outsiders had the advantages
Yeah.
that we have today. The mere fact that Donald Trump won at least one
Yes.
election,
Yeah.
probably two, the mere
Yeah.
fact that that happened despite the
Yeah.
entire, I mean, uniparty, GOP and Democrat, everybody was against the guy. That is a testament to the
Right.
internet. And yes, it's censored, but even a censored internet compared to what we had in the past,
Yeah.
it's night and day.
Peter St Onge, you're an even much cooler guy than I thought. This is this no just I like the way that you speak not only about liberty but about right. This is a long lasting fight. This fight is not going to go away. And so when people turn toward
Right.
despair, that's a mistake, right? Not just a theological error. That's a mistake. The fight is going to go on and on. What is the thing that we need to know? Okay, moving
Yep.
from the general to a little more specific, what's the most important specific thing we need to know right now? Is it about our deficit? Is it about inflation? Is it about destroying the our domestic energy production? What do you think is the number one thing that we need to be looking at right now?
Yeah, I think in terms of the economy, the sort of linchpin that holds together the forces of evil
Hmm.
is really inflation. They use inflation to grow the federal government, to take over big swaths of our life. Those trillions that they steal via inflation, via government deficits, those are then plowed into building out this army who, every morning they wake up in the morning and think of some new way to control us.
Right.
I think the inflation is really what accelerated sort of this march towards
Hmm.
totalitarian government that we've seen in the 20th century. That is also how it ends because they do not
Hmm.
have any discipline. They have no guardrails. They're going to keep pushing and pushing it. We've seen this many times historically with fiat money. They cannot stop themselves. So I think inflation is the big one to watch. If we zoom out from economics, then I think the single most important fight that we have
Hmm.
today is speech. We absolutely have to be able to explain to people what's happening. They will, sort of the saving grace of socialism is that it doesn't
Hmm.
work, right? So the more socialism you put
Right.
in, you start getting these failures, people notice. I call it Zeno's paradox of socialism. The closer you get, the harder it is to advance because people can see the failures. But what's key there is that you have to be able to
Right.
show people exactly what the failures are because a lot of these things are not obvious, right? Money, for example, things like inflation, that is not obvious to normal people.
Hmm.
They suffered through public school. They,
Hmm.
it was never explained to them exactly that, the Federal Reserve is a counterfeiting cartel. And so you have to be able to explain these things because otherwise the failures of socialism, they're going to gaslight us into thinking that what really happened is we didn't have enough socialism. So, you know, within economics,
Right.
inflation, bigger
Are people
picture,
getting it
speech.
now? I mean, I saw a couple of reports the other day, which has to do with inflation insofar as it has to do with the climate change agenda, which was the rationale for printing an awful lot of money.
Right.
And I just saw
Exactly.
a number of car
Exactly.
companies. I think the former head of Toyota saying like, yeah, we never thought this was going to work. I think Mercedes Benz, one of the I think Ford as well is deciding to roll all this back. So are
Hmm.
these good signs? I mean, again, in the course of the eternal battle, are these good signs? And people are. It's not just that people have a say that people don't want these vehicles, but people will look and say, I told you the climate change thing is garbage, and even the companies now understand it's garbage.
Exactly. Yeah, I think at a certain point,
Hmm.
reality does intrude. So, consumers are not buying the EVs. The industry invested based on the early adopters who were largely
Right.
ideologically driven. Also, a lot of it is again gaslighting. So you've got a media that stands ready to misrepresent. You'll save this much
Right.
on gasoline. Forget what happens to your
Hmm.
depreciation. There's lots of chicanery that goes on, but fortunately, we're seeing it
Hmm.
with the climate stuff. The amount of money invested in green energy is plunging. It's
Wow.
down about a third over the past couple of months. DEI, the whole woke thing, is falling apart. We're seeing it with the Israel
Hmm.
Palestine conflict, I think, now, where a lot of people who they thought they knew the left. They thought
Right.
that the left was about love and acceptance and tolerance. And I think they're kind of waking up to the
Right.
reality of the left. So I think that we are seeing a lot of sort of illusions crumble. But again, that's exactly where the speech comes in. So we have to be able to highlight these things, to publicize these.
Hmm.
What I think has been most exciting to me is when I started doing the videos, I figured I was probably talking to
Right.
MBAs. I mean, I was talking to a relatively sophisticated audience. And what I found is, very regular people, truck
Hmm.
drivers, blue collar workers, they want to know what's happening. And they watch these videos, they completely understand it. It's not fundamentally difficult to understand what they're doing to you. It's that the media intentionally cloaks it in jargon, and sort of the pomp of the whole thing. You've got the almost quasi religious ritual of the Federal Reserve comes in and is smoke coming out of the chimney, so we've elected a new interest rate. And once you cut through that,
Right.
you just you sort of
Right.
talk like in normal terms. What exactly are these jerks doing? None of it is fundamentally complex. And what's been exciting to me is that absolutely regular people are not only they interested in hearing about it, but after they hear it a couple of
Wow.
times, they master the stuff. You see
Hmm.
them on comments on Twitter, and they're talking about the Fed's doing this and the yields on the 10 years doing that, and it's
Well,
actually
the
pretty
way
cool to
you put
watch.
it, that they intentionally mystify this language to keep it as right, to keep it as sort of a
Right.
priesthood. But really, Peter, the way that you've broken through, the way that you explain it for people, it's really I'm so grateful, and we know that hundreds of thousands of your followers are grateful too. Look, we're going to cut away for less than a minute here. If you're watching on Facebook or
Yep.
YouTube, please make sure you make the jump to Epoch TV exclusively. We're going to continue our great conversation with the great Peter Onge, and when we Peter St Onge, and when we come back, I'm going to ask Peter about a book that he thinks is very important. The author's name of that book is Jim Grant, and the title is, let me just check it again. It's The Forgotten Depression, and that's the depression of 1920. And Peter has very good reason to think that this illuminates where we are right now and what we can learn from that book and what we'll learn from our discussion as we pick it up in less than a minute. Make sure you make the jump. Thanks.
We finally out of the prison of communism, and there's just nothing to worry about. I think a lot of immigrants like me probably feel the same. But it was 2020. 2020 come the turning point for me. And when I saw the riots going on in American streets, that hit me so hard. And that's cultural revolution. The history of the horror of communism was never taught to the Americans. When they saw something as horrific as 2020 riots, they have no reference point. And to people back in China, we recognize it. And that's why I eventually quit my job and started to devote my whole time to write this book.